Good evening and welcome to another episode of Sukhitatta, the healthy self, we could say. We are going to talk about a very important topic this evening about illness and cure, something that we would commonly talk about with the modern day life and with the ongoing situation around globally. What is illness? What are the cures in a Buddhist way? And joining me for this discussion is Venerable Professor Miniswate Vimalanyana, who is the head of department of the Buddhist culture of the Postgraduate Institute of Pali and Buddhist Studies of the University of California. Very good evening to you. So, starting things off, as we said, illness and cure. Obviously, those are two topics that are commonly discussed among society, and there are various methods of cure. There are various illnesses that we talk about. Just to start things, if you can just elaborate on what illness is all about and what is the Buddhist way of looking at it as illness.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Kosala Mahatma, first of all, I should thank you for inviting me to this important discussion. And we have taken a very important topic. Now, illness and cure is a very important topic as I see in this context, especially for mainly for two reasons. One thing is that we know that the time that we are passing is very critical. An alarming pandemic has strike the humanity, the humans, and it is one of the alarming pandemic in the history of humans. So therefore, there is a lot of deaths have occurred, and there is a lot of frustration, there is a lot of fear, and also we also feel some sort of ill confidence from time to time. So therefore, it is very important to talk about some of the things actually that we might discuss in this episode might have some relevance to this particular thing also, the pandemic. And on the other hand, Buddhism, the career of the Buddha seems to be also equal to the career of a doctor. So what Buddha did during the 45 years as the Buddha, he himself actually identified with a career of doctor. So he understood himself to be a doctor. Now, in one of the discourses, the Buddha said that I instruct what we call noble purgation, that is Ariyo, the noble purgation, Ariya Virechana is the Pali word. So we know the fact that Virechana is a method of purification, the purification of the body practiced in Ayurveda. So what Buddha actually did was that he purified the mind. He made the human beings free from different types of mental ailments, defilements actually. So therefore, this is the meaning of this statement. So Buddha said that he instructed the Ariya Virechana. So Ariya Virechana is the prescribing. Virechana is something done by the doctor, and Buddha himself, the Buddha said that he is doing something similar to purify the mind of the people. And in another context, Buddha said that he is an incomparable surgeon. Anuttaro Sallakatto. Anuttaro means incomparable. Surgeon is he is a surgeon. Sallakatta means surgeon. The Pali word for surgeon is Sallakatta. So in that case also the Buddha, it is very clear that how he thought of himself. So it is very much and we also cannot forget the fact that the Buddhist approach in order to analyze suffering is also has affinity with the Ayurvedic approach. Now the Buddha in the Ayurveda we identify that there is a disease, and then we look into causes and the particular cure, and then the treatment. So in the same way the Buddha also thought of the Four Noble Truth was declared by Buddha in similar terms, and we know that there is suffering and we are trying to find out the causes of suffering, and then the way out of suffering and the practice. So therefore there is a great affinity between Buddha and kind of I mean what I mean is that it's a kind of, there is a kind of similarity,
a connection,
a connection. Coming to the topic, Mr. Kosala, now about the disease. What is the how can we define disease in Buddhism? Now there are two words for disease in Buddhism. One is vyadhi, which is very famous, and another one roga. So both are used in Pali text. Vyadhi or disease or illness is a reality in Buddhism. Now it is a part of suffering also. When the Buddha described about suffering, he said that disease is one type of suffering. Now we have heard that the Buddha said jatipi dukkha, birth is suffering, jarapi dukkha, that is decay is suffering, and then we come to vyadipi dukkha, that is illness is suffering. So that is a reality and it is a part of suffering. But we have to remember that now that is not the end in Buddhism. We are talking about the way out of suffering. But however, now the important thing is that the disease was understood in Buddhism to be two types, that is kāyika roga and mānasika roga. But in Buddhism there is a special technical term for this, not mānasika. Mānasika roga is the Sinhala word, and we also use manovyadhi or manoroga, that is also somewhat later. But chetasika roga is the term which was used in the early discourses. So now kāyika roga is clearly the bodily disease, and chetasika roga refers to the mental diseases. This is a very simple demarcation between bodily diseases and mental diseases, but still we have to understand this was very challenging, because when the Buddha introduced this difference, kāyika roga and mānasika roga, especially when he talked about the mental aspect, this was a very special kind of elaboration into mind and matter, psycho and soma, body and mind. Why? There is no soul, there is no permanent individuality, there is no any core or essence which is permanent, like how some of the early Indian contemplatives had understood body and mind. So there was no such a thing. So introducing body and mind in this manner, even in relation to the disease, was a challenging thing for many centuries. Even today the people cannot understand this particular explanation properly. But anyway, now there is one important, there are two important things. Probably we can describe this difference later on also. So at the beginning I should say that when the Buddha differentiated between the bodily disease and mental diseases, he said that one can keep himself free from bodily diseases for a long period of time, even for 100 years. But it is impossible to find a person who claimed to be health being free from mental diseases. Te bhikkave satta dullabha lokasmin ye chetasikena rogena muhuttampi arogyam patijananti. That means, that is the meaning of that. So it is very difficult to find such a person who claim the health being free from the mental diseases. Now, if I come to that term, Chetasika is also very important. I should explain that a little bit if I have time.
Yes, you can.
Now, the Buddha, as I told you, is not using Manoroga, but he is using the term Chetasika Roga. What is Chetasika actually? This is a specific technical term in Buddhism. Now, Mr. Kosala, have you heard of this classification of mind and matter into 5 aggregates? Probably you might have heard, but even though probably the technical elaborations are sort of for anyone it is these are there are very profound elaborations. Now, in this context, this Chetasika means 3 aggregates. Now, in the 5 aggregates classification, we have Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara and Vijnana, that is matter, feelings, perceptions. Perceptions means how we perceive the world, how we know the world. Sankara means dispositions, that is the innate or latent tendencies like habits.
Yes.
And then we have Vijnana, the consciousness. Now, Chetasika is a term which covers 3 categories, that is 3 aggregates in relation to according to this classification. They are Vedana, Sanya, Sankara. Then Vedana means feeling. Sanya means perception, Sankara means disposition. If you closely look at this observation, you will understand, Mr. Kosala. Now, these are actually most of the Chetasikas are emotions, because Sankara Kanda, the aggregates of disposition, consists of almost all the emotions of the being. Anger is an emotion, love is an emotion, compassion is also emotion. So, we have these good and bad emotion, or in Buddhist things wholesome and unwholesome emotions. So, all these wholesome and unwholesome emotions are within Sankara Kanda. So, in that sense, what Buddha mean by Chetasika Roga is the diseases in relation to mostly the emotions. So, we have feelings and perceptions, but they are also to some extent Sankara and Chetasika. So, they are also to some extent emotions. So, mostly our psychological illnesses are related to our emotional world. So, that is how the Buddhist explanation about it. So, then we must clear about there are 2 things, that clearly there is these 2 divisions, bodily diseases and mental diseases, and at the same time these mental diseases are related to emotional aspect of the human being, and apart from that I should say that this division is also very important, because even though this division seems to be very simple, actually there is a kind of it was a very challenging introduction to the mind and matter that we see in Buddhism.
So, when you talked about the body and the mental illnesses, illness is also you can describe it also as a sickness, is it?
Sickness,
yes.
You can call so. Yes,
you can so, apart from the mind and the body sickness or illness that you get, is there any other different types of illnesses that a human being can be contracted with?
Yeah. So, now as I told you, Kosala Mahatma, now there are 2 types of diseases. Now, it is clear to us, that is bodily diseases and mental diseases. Now we have to look at, now as you asked the types of diseases, now we have to look how these 2 types of diseases are described in Buddhism. Now, bodily diseases, now there is something interesting, that as I told you, now the disease is a reality in Buddhism. So, that was described in more objective manner. So, there is no any secret. So, for diseases, now there were during that time some of the contemplatives explained diseases in relation to some of the spirits or gods. the cause of some of the diseases were thought to be the anger of some god. For example, Jwara is called fever. Jwara or fever was thought to be now Jwara was caused by one particular god cause. Now he was called I cannot remember, but a Vedic god.
Yeah.
Vedic god. So the cause was a divine spirit. So that kind of mystic ideas were also there, but in Buddhism actually this is very objective and it's very realistic also. Now there are resources that describes different types of ailments. In that case, the Buddha has used, I can say, the knowledge of Ayurveda. Most of these the diseases, the names of the diseases were taken from Ayurveda. So even today we can find these names. Now these diseases we can we can find English terminology for that one, because these diseases were existing during that time and they are existing today, and now we can give the English names for these diseases. So in the text like now the Buddha has used them, and afterwards in the text Ayurvedic text like Susruta, Charaka, in these texts we can find these names. So for example, I can give you, the Buddha says Kaso. Now Buddha talks about the Chakkuroga, Sotaroga, the diseases of eye, the diseases of ear, diseases of tongue, so and so forth. And he continues to talk about other types of diseases which have specific names also. Kaso is cough in modern saying, and Saso is asthma, and Pinaso is kata. It's a disease, the nose based disease, and Daho is pyrexia. Jaro, the Buddha says Jaro is another disease, and this is also Jara is Jwara, as I said, it's a type of fever. Kuchirogo is a stomachache, and then Mucha is fainting. Pakandika is dysentery. Dysentery is a serious type of diarrhea. And Sula is an intestinal pain that is called gripes. So in that way, all these terms are taken from the Ayurveda. So what is important is there is no any mystic. And the other thing is, in order to cure these diseases, there are no any the mystic means. For example, there was a time that now there is one instance in the Vinaya Kosala Mahatma. There we find an interesting incident that monk is reported to have a spirit induced disease. Now it is called Amanusa Bada. He now according to the Vinaya description, he got this disease, and then the fellow monks tried to overcome the disease of this monk, and he was taken to different doctors, and they failed finally. And this monk himself went to a shop where the pork is sold, and having gone there, he ate pork and the blood of pig. We can understand why and what happened here. This is definitely an idea coming from the Indian cultural mind, because the people, even today, some people believe in, even in Sri Lanka probably, the people believe in that the people to avoid the influences of spirits, you have to eat the pork or the flesh of pig. So I think this was the kind of idea that this venerable had during that time. So he ate the pork and then drank the blood of the pig, and he overcame the disease. And then actually now, as he overcame the disease, then Buddha said that okay, if anyone has a spirit induced disease, this is the medicine.
This is the
So it is easily understandable, and the Buddha was actually facilitating the cultural mind, because if the people believe in that, okay, this is the disease and this is the cure. Like
so it can be a myth, is it?
It is in a way you can say it is a myth, but what was important was the practical thing of that. So it is a reality. When the monk ate and that particular thing and drank the blood of pig, he became okay. So then that's a reality. So the Buddha, I think, thought of that. So these incidents are very rare. Apart from that, all the time there is a separate section in the Vinaya, Kosala Mahatma. This is called Vattakandaka, and there are many treatments, that is the medical prescriptions are provided with. So these medicines are actually the real medication, and they also belong to a connection. They also have a connection with Ayurvedic medical system. So we can check it. We can see that. So therefore, this is a very realistic kind of way. So the relation, the importance of this discussion is, the relevance to this period is that now we are, when the pandemic hit us, actually there is no any other method. So what we have to do is to follow the medical, the kind
medical
of the measures to protect ourselves, and to vaccinate, and also to follow these instructions to keep social distancing and so on and so forth. So we saw that in some countries, actually, some people are following some mystic cults, but that is not happening in Sri Lanka. Rarely something can happen, but Sri Lankan people are intelligent. I think this is because of the fact that we have this knowledge coming from Buddhism. We know that disease is a reality, and what we have to do is to take treatments and to follow the instructions coming from the doctors or the experts, medical experts. So that is the thing that we have to do. So that is about physical ailments, but the most interesting thing is the mental ailments, which are the emotions. If we have time, I can do a little elaboration on this particular thing. I don't know the time.
On the mental.
On the mental illness.
If you can put it in a nutshell.
Yes. So now there is a discourse called Dhammadayada Sutta, and in the Dhammadayada Sutta, there are a number of emotions are given, which are very important to understand the approach of Buddha to mental illnesses. I will tell you a few. Okay, now one is Lobha, which is very famous. Lobha is desire. There is Dosa also. Dosa or Vyapada is for hatred or hate. And then we have another one called, we have Lobha, we have Dosa, then another one Krodha. Krodha is anger. We feel that this is very much close to the second one, but there is difference. The difference is Krodha is associated with taking revenge, but Dosa is not such a thing. So it is a sudden, probably a sudden anger which might disappear within a minute or shortly.
Short-lived emotion.
Short-lived emotion.
You get angry at certain point, and then you're just calm again.
Yes, you become calm again. But in this case, in the third case, this can exist for a longer period of time. The taking revenge, the idea to take revenge, might exist in this life as well as in the lives to come. So we have heard of this story of a woman who wanted to take revenge from one of the women, and this anger continued for many lifespans. This is something we don't have time to explain these things. A story found in the Buddhist text, and that is what we call Krodha. And there is another one called Upanaha, enmity. Upanaha, you feel an enmity, probably, we don't know the reason, probably because he doesn't belong to your party or a political group, whatever, but you feel an enmity, but necessarily there may or may not have an anger. Probably you don't have anger, but still you feel some sort of enmity, some sort of rivalry, you can say. And there is another one that was called Upanaha, and there is another one. We have Lobha, Dosa, Krodha, and we have another one, Makki. Makki means hypocrisy. Makki means hypocrisy or contempt. Now, this is the quality or the mentality that you do not see any good of anything.
Like a hypocrite.
Hypocrite. You don't see any good of anything. And there is another one, what we called palasi. Palasi is the fact that you don't have any respect to one. I mean, look at the way how the Buddha analyzed. These are very subtle psychological, I mean, emotions that we are having. So if you closely observe these the emotions, we can understand how Buddha was acute in classifying these emotions, which are again mental diseases. And let me tell you 2 or 3 more things. And we have another one called thamba. Thamba means insensibility. That means you are not going to listen to anyone. You are not going to listen to anyone. Sometimes we feel that some people, when they grow old, they become thamba. And they are sort of hard-minded, very difficult to change their mental setting. So
putting it lamely, being stubborn.
Yes, something
part
like
of being
that.
Stubborn.
Part of stubbornness. So something like this, thambo. Then we have another thing called machari. Machari means miserliness. That is an extreme form of desire. Now, we have in a story about a millionaire called Maccariya Kosiya. He didn't want to spend even a coin to give an alms to a monk. And we also have a story about the father of a child called Matta Kundali. The names of the child is Matta Kundali, and he was suffering from malnutrition. He means the boy was suffering from the malnutrition, and the father of the boy actually did not want to spend any money to cure him. So then finally that boy died because of malnutrition, but the father was a millionaire. So the mentality that this father had was maccherang, that is machariya, that is miserliness, that the mentality that which is an extreme form of desire. So this is how the Buddha, so we don't have time to explain all these things, but this is how the Buddha actually explain the emotions and the subtle nature of the elaboration of the mental diseases. So therefore it is very important to understand this teaching. So if you I think understand the Buddha's explanation of these emotions, I think this is a big psychology that we can use. So in modern times now, most of the therapeutic systems in the world make use of these emotions, because they know that these emotions are very, the explanations of the Buddha are very useful to shape a Buddhist psychology, because they touch the depths of the psychological aspect of the human beings. Now for example, these emotions are, now as I said you earlier, these emotions are described without a self. You don't have a self, you don't have individuality or a permanent essence which is existing within you, but still the Buddha has described without, if you look into it, if you look into yourself, this is what you see, either good or bad. But at the same time, now when you talk about as we now describe these bad mental emotions, we also have to keep in mind that there are also good emotions. For example, now loving kindness is a good emotions, and compassion is a good emotion. So we have to develop those things also, but first we need to understand the bad side. If we understand the bad side, then only we can develop the good side. And if the bad side is hidden, now the Buddha says that the most of these tendencies are hidden. The Buddha says that they are existing as anusaya. Anusaya means latent. Nobody notices it until they arouse. Sometimes we tend to think that we don't have any problem, we don't have any psychological issues, but still they are latent, and so they from time to time they arise. So this is called pariyutthana. When the time comes, when you confront with the situation, suddenly these emotions arise, and then that is called pariyutthana. In the most dangerous thing is that these emotions actually lead you to a particular action. So for example, a person who has envy or anger might attack a person. So that is what you will call vitikam, it's a transgression.
Or even harm him or herself by themselves if it goes into that emotion.
Right, right.
That like in depression.
Like depression. So that can happen. So that is why I say that this Buddhist elaboration of emotions are very important, and they were very important during the time of the Buddha to inquire into oneself, and today also they are helpful for the same purpose, and also to shape very scientific disciplines like therapeutic system to sort of to treat and facilitate the the well-being of the human beings.
So when you talk about illness and then cure, I think we talked about the modern part of cure with the therapeutic systems coming in. But in a Buddhist way, the main part of cure, how do you want to describe it as?
Right, yes. Now here that is very important thing. Now curing is the most important thing. Now as you know that nobody wants to be ill, right? That is a painful experience. So the Buddha says, now there is a very beautiful statement that all the beings are sukha kama and dukkha patikula. Sukha kama means they are hankering for happiness, that they are, everybody is desirous or need to experience happiness. And dukkha patikula, they deny or reject or sort of disgust the pain. Dukkha means pain, dukkha patikula, and also sukha kamani bhutani. So that is the basic principle in the in case of life forms, because all the beings, life forms are pleasure seeking beings. Pleasure seeking beings, what they want is pleasure, I mean whatever the happiness and whatever the method through which happiness comes, that is what they basically want. Sukha kamani bhutani. Now when we talk about, now disease is something we need to get out of. So we want to see the end of the disease, so we need treatments. But here I should say that today we don't want to talk about actually these medical treatments that we read in the Buddhist text, because now during the time of the Buddha there were systems of medications. Actually that was mostly from the Ayurveda. Now Buddha definitely was a person who was very conversant with Ayurveda, and probably some of these information might have come to Buddha from the doctors during his time, because we know Jivaka was a physician. Jivaka was a friend of the Buddha in a sense, and there was a lot of friendly discussion between Buddha and Jivaka. So most of these Vinaya prescription, I mean these medical prescriptions are found in the Vinaya, and they might be from from these doctors. So therefore this is actually old Ayurveda during that time. Ayurveda also developed, it became systematic in the course of time, and nowadays we have a different type of Ayurveda, and also we have other sophisticated system of medication. So therefore I think we don't need to talk about this medication system, but there are things that we have to some of the things that we need to concentrate on, talking about physical well-being. One thing is the Buddhism talks about, the Buddha advises about the limit of the food. That is very important. That is bhojane mattanyuta. Now the bhojane mattanyuta, that is the knowing the limit of the food, I think should not be limited to the amount of the food, the exact amount that you can comfortably consume. I think that is not the only thing. I think you have to think about the nutrition also. I mean the food which is sufficiently nutritious, and at the same time which is in the sufficient amount. So taking that kind of food is very healthy. Now, if you that is one thing. I will brief all these things, and another aspect is even though the now bodily health is not to be achieved through the physical means. Now, there are a lot of discussions and discourses in the Buddha how the physical well-being was achieved through the mental practices. One thing, and there is a very interesting stanza Kosala Mahatma which comes to my mind is Manujassa pamatta charino mattang janati laddha bhojane tanutassa bhavanti vedana ayun samma jirati ayu palayanti. This is the stanza. The meaning of this stanza is Manujassa pamatta charino, to the person who is not lethargic. Mattan janati laddha bhojani. As I told you earlier, mattan janati means he knows the exact amount of food that he should take to lead a comfortable life, or which is convenient to him at that particular moment. And then tanutassa bhavanti vedana. And there is another particular element, that is manujasa sada satimato. Now, when you take the food, you must be mindful. You must be mindful. This is something today we lose. We know the fact that always there are criticisms against the people who are watching the TV and taking the meal. We have now in the houses some people criticize against those whatever the children or the parents who are taking meal watching the television. But this is not a good thing. Actually, now this is a bad thing, because if we are not conscious about the taking food, this can badly affect ourselves. So therefore, when we take food, we must be mindful on the action called taking food. So that is what this stanza explains. Manujassa pamatta charino mattang manujassa sada satimato. I'm sorry. Manujassa sada satimato. Sada satimato is conscious every time. Mattan janati laddha bhojani, and then he takes the food knowing the exact amount. And the next part is tanutassa bhavanti vedana. All his pains become limited. It means disappear. Tanutassa bhavanti vedana. All the pains go away, in another sense. And then samma jirati. This is the most important part. Samma jirati means your body decays slowly. Your body decays slowly. If you want to be young, one thing you have to do is to take food, eat food mindfully. So this is what it instructs. So this is another aspect. Apart from all these things, there is one monk called Pilindavacha Kosala Mahatma. He was suffering from so many diseases during the time of the Buddha. He had what we call these bowls full of filled with different kinds of medicinal liquids. Medicinal liquids. The people, whoever met with him, offered him only medical, ingredients, because they knew that these monks were suffering from so many diseases, and he was always preparing these medicines for his illnesses to cure these different types of illnesses of him. But the most important thing is Venerable Pilindavacha was a wonderful monk. He was very mindful. He had what we call this all kind of good contacts with the people, and even with the people like King Bimbisara, who was the most powerful king, was a friend of this monk, and the people were very friendly with him. So now another aspect of this is, even though we have a disease, actually we must be able to to bear it up. That is another aspect that we have to think about. So this is the physical aspect, the physical sort of the physical well-being, the methods that we can follow to the psychological means to ease our body.
So ease your body. So I think that is very important, because when we talk about illness, people always talk about the body illnesses that you create. But then how can you overcome this, and what can you do to prevent the causes of these illnesses? Something that you talked about, how you consume your food, because food can be a big part of your illness.
Yeah, there is also another aspect. I don't know whether we have time. The mental diseases, the overcoming of mental diseases. If we have time, we can.
Yes, we can also put that in a nutshell.
Yes, yes. So I will brief a particular discourse called Sabbhasava Sutta. Sabbhasava Sutta is the sutta of all asravas, the influxes. In this sutta, there are 7 methods given. The methods are the methods of overcoming mental diseases. Now, one is dasana, looking. You have to closely observe what is going on in mind, and you have to select what is good, and that is one thing, dasana. The second one is samvara, restraining. Most of the time you have to restrain your senses. If you hear something bad, for example, it could be a scold or a blame or a insult, what you have to restrain is your ear. So if you can easily give it up, let it go, then your emotions do not arise. So that is what we call samvara. The third one is patisevana. I was talking about Venerable Pilindavacha. Venerable Pilindavacha was suffering from many diseases, but he was mentally stable. He was mentally very strong. That is the third aspect, samvara. And patisevana. And adivasana is you have to tolerate. And then parivajjana. Sometimes you have to deny some of the things. You have to reject some of the things. Vinodana, and also that is a kind of rejection, I mean the emotional part. And finally there is another aspect, bhavana. Bhavana is, I mean, this is the most important thing. Now, even though you do all these former things, still these emotions and all that might be with you. But bhavana, by doing meditation, or by being concentrated, you can sort of overcome so many bad emotions, unwholesome emotions, because sometimes we don't know actually what is internally happening. Sometimes what we are doing is a very simple thing, knowing the present moment. Have you heard of Kosala Mahatma, this particular thing? This is a very modern concept, but this is derived from Buddhism. Knowing the present moment means we are concentrated on whatever happening and whatever our experience. Now, if we listen something, we say, we note it, we label it, this is listening. If we feel the touch between the body and the floor or the chair, we label it, this is touch. And if we see something, maybe even when we have closed our eyes, when we see something through even the darkness, we notice it, this is seeing. And if we have another experience, we label it and just give it up. Even though this seems to be a very simple thing, this is very powerful as a technique. Then the people say, this is in the world there is a big problem called attention deficiency. Attention deficiency, which means you have a lack of attention. Now, Kosala Mahatma, in modern context, the people don't have much time, but we have lot of expectation. We have to shift our mind from one thing to another. We have to think about money, we have to think about our parents, we have to think about our children. So many intentions, so many desires, so many expectations are there. So when we shift our mind, what is happening is we don't have a time to concentrate on our life. We don't have to concentrate on even on our eating. I mean, as we explained.
So that comes down to attention. You don't have attention even on your food, because you're on a basic marathon run to make sure that you fulfill your need.
Right. So if you can just keep attention on this, even on these simple things, it does a lot. It improves your memory. It improves your righteousness. It improves your awareness about your internal experience as well as external experience. So that is where actually we are, this is where the Buddhist psychology blooms actually. So this is an area where modern psychologists and scientists have focused on.
I think we've talked about a lot of things, a topic that we can go on and on about illness and cure the Buddhist way, but time is definitely permitting us as we come to the conclusion of a very important discussion about illness and cure. the Buddhist way. So I would like to thank Venerable Miriswate Vimalanyana for joining us on this very important discussion. Thank you very much for being a part of this episode.
Thank you very much. Sabbe satta bhavanta sukhitatta.
So with that, we've come to the conclusion of another episode of Sukhitatta. So hope we'll be with you for more episodes on various topics that are not only helpful to the society, but also for personal glory and personal health and well-being. So join us again for our next episode of Sukhitatta.